Hello, and welcome to revision tips for CIPS Level 2, Certificate in Procurement and Supply Operations. This is Module 5, Inventory, Logistics and Expediting, and it's Learning Outcome 3, which is to know the effective expediting and how it can be achieved in procurement and supply. So let's look at inventory management and the 4 levels and methods of inventory management. So monitoring levels of inventory over time can reveal which items are used most often and which are used less as much, if at all. These 4 methods are known as specific identification, FIFO, which is first in, first out, LIFO, which is last in, first out, and weighted averages, which allocates the same cost to all items of the same type based on an average of the cost at which the items were bought. So it's important to consider the advantages and disadvantages of each of these measurement methods in order to, I suppose, understand which one is best for your organisation. So let's go for first in, first out. Clearly this would be done when you have short life products, because you want to make sure that you use the items that were first in order to prevent them from going out of date. The last in, last out method tries to simplify the process of measuring inventory because it assumes that the last items bought should be used first, which is far more useful for accounting purposes where inflation is considered and the price of stock is assumed to increase. The specific identification is used where the actual cost is used to identify specific products or items. Easier when high value items are being used or sold, such as sort of aeroplanes and property. But using this method can also come down to the sort of nuts and bolts of each item. And in theory, it's the best method to provide accuracy, but it's really time consuming. The weighted average is probably the most commonly used. You essentially look at the costs of all the volumes that you've purchased and the prices, multiplying one by the other, and then totaling up the actual cost of the stock you're holding, dividing it by the number of units in stock. Now, just in time can help with some of this inventory management, and just in time will aim to reduce the inventory and mitigate what we know as oversupply. It brings inventory levels down to a minimal level, or in its purest forms, can have no inventory at all. Any disruption in the just-in-time system, such as supplies arriving late, will have a knock-on effect which can bring the whole process to a standstill. So let's look at some methods to reduce stockouts. And stockouts or stock shortages happen when an organisation runs out of stock. Could be because they've not ordered enough to meet the needs, or there's been an unprecedented demand. A common cause of stockout is lack of cash flow or funds to purchase the stock. So cash flow should be investigated to see if cash can be freed up. Stockouts incur additional costs due to the need for downtime in production and the cost associated with that, but also needing to expedite replacements and an opportunity cost in retail. So reducing the risk of stockouts is critical. The methods to reduce the stockouts include employing specialists to identify appropriate levels of stock to order, paying close attention to data and trends, and employing the most up-to-date stock recording techniques to monitor turnover in order to forecast demand. Improving data accuracy through use of point-of-sale inventory systems such as barcoding and radio frequency ID. Identifying optimal times to reorder stock and ensuring proper management practices are being used. You could also work with suppliers to improve communication and relationships. This is known as strategic procurement. So coming back to a subject I've already done tips on before, which is the EOQ, which stands for Economic Order Quantity. This is the optimum quantity of units to order that minimises the storage and ordering costs. Can be calculated using a formula that takes into account the annual demand, the setup costs, the holding costs of an item for a year. The factors you need to consider when forecasting timely deliveries include the type of goods that you're buying, because clearly if it's a short life product, the EOQ might not be helpful because it might suggest you to order more than you can sell before the date on the product expires. So consider the length of the shelf life and other seasonal factors such as when it's hot or when it's cold, different products will sell at different times. The lead times, fluctuations in the market price. Sometimes it's better to buy things out of season to get a better price. But then you have to consider the availability of storage space and the budget. Now, there are 3 techniques that can be employed to help with forecasting. We have qualitative methods, time series, and causal modes. Not all methods are suitable to all procurements or all products. So you need to consider where in the product life cycle a specific product is, because different factors will influence the success and accuracy of the forecasting method at each stage. So the qualitative type of forecasting uses expert opinions and focus groups to try and identify the cause and effect of a number of variables. And it's used primarily when historical data is unavailable or insufficient to indicate any trends. So as you can see, we've got methods such as think tanks and Delphi models, market research, and the cost and time will depend on the method you choose. Time series analysis attempts to identify patterns on historical data sets, and then it projects future trends using the patterns identified. You ideally need several years' worth of historical data so that it can reveal any abnormally high or low figures due to one-off events. But it's really good for identifying seasonal trends, cyclical trends, and growth rates. So you use your moving average, something called exponential smoothing, and trend projections. The cost is quite low and the time is quite quick, so long as you've got several years worth of historical data to work with. The causal modes attempt to identify patterns in historical data, and then it projects future trends using, again, the patterns that have been identified. So one of the options is something called regression model, which essentially looks at if you was to change, I don't know, the price of one item, would it have an impact on another product? So let's say you are putting burgers on promotion. It's possible that the burger buns will then have demand fluctuation because they're linked to the burgers. So it uses the specific events and identifies those patterns, combining the past experience with events like strikes and promotions. It's more likely to represent what is expected as part of that promotion or strike action. And they're continuously updated as more information becomes available. The diffusion index uses a group of variables that are considered together, and their overall objective and effect gives a percentage, and you apply that to the index of the current figure to predict the next period's results. Life cycle analysis, I suppose the likely success of this product or a new product using this traditional S-curve of the life cycle looks at the general characteristics of each acceptance phase. So when it goes through the sort of early innovation stage to the early adopters, through to the majority, which is more maturity, to laggards when it goes into decline. And that can be used for the basis of forecasting as well. Again, costs are low, but it's a medium time frame to get that information. So moving on to planning milestones and activities. Milestones can be used in procurement to help with planning, and they're used for things like monitoring the progress of a project, identifying whether the schedule needs amending, to check whether the project is on budget, manage expectations about when the project will realistically be completed, what key tasks need to be done, and to motivate people involved to complete the project so they can celebrate specific achievements and see that progress is being made. And each of those blue squares on the left-hand side are milestones, which are discrete tasks that need to be completed. So to achieve milestones, procurements need to understand and establish the order quantities, the quality standards, timing and delivery arrangements, communicate this with their suppliers, and identify key contacts for buying and supplying organisations who will monitor and expedite progress. So you can see the elements on the right-hand side: volumes and quantities, the quality standards, the buying price, the payment terms, when is the right time to identify suppliers but also appoint them, lead times, and the transport delivery method. You may come across some problems along the way. I mean, this, shows you something that's going to run quite smoothly, but if you do face a delay and you have to solve a problem, there are some techniques you can deploy. The first and most obvious one is to establish a strong relationship with your supplier, which can help when problems arise. Or have a backup plan, which can be used to mitigate any risks, so an alternative supplier on standby, just in case the main supplier is unable to provide you with the goods and services. And the DMIAC model is used when you're dealing with unexpected events and when you want to solve problems. So this is DMAIC, which stands for define the problem, measure the problem, analyze the problem, understand what you need to do to improve the problem, and then you control it. Define, measure, analyze, improve, control. Okay, we're now going to look at cash flow versus profitability and the key financial terms. So cash flow is the money going in and out of a business at a specific point in time. And organisations need good cash flow in order to help the fundamental operations of its business while allowing for the business to grow. If a business is short on cash one month and can't pay a supplier or a staff member, then it's likely that all the operations will stop and the business will cease trading. So it really does show how important cash flow is. Working capital is the value of current assets minus the current liabilities. And assets are things that you own, so they're usually cash in the bank and property, things that you physically own. Liabilities are things you owe, so amounts that you owe to your suppliers or creditors of some description for loans. Ideal ratio is to have twice as many assets as liabilities. A high ratio suggests the business is not operating effectively, as there are excess assets that are not contributing to the performance of the business. And a lower ratio indicates the business is in danger of being unable to pay its suppliers, which could impact the whole supply chain. In terms of profit, it's quite simply the total revenue minus the total expenditure. It's what's left over at the end. And an organisation can be in profit but have a really poor cash flow. So you need to understand and ensure that income exceeds your outgoings. The strategies you can adopt will include controlling capital funds within the scope of the project or the contract so that all transactions are completed within the set budget, or vetting your suppliers to ensure their competence and capability to complete their role, and allocating sufficient funds to ensure that no key supplier or subcontractor suffers from cash flow problems during the project. The significance of payments to suppliers. So payment terms will be stipulated in the contract with a supplier. Making regular payments to suppliers will help the buying organisation and the supplying organisation with cash flow. Prepayment or mobilisation fees are things that are paid upfront by the buyer to the supplier to fund expensive acquisition of things like raw materials or to pay for movements of critical plant and equipment. Stage payments are payments that are paid at certain milestones. So if we were looking at a construction project, for example, we might decide to pay 20% on completion of the foundations, 30% on erection of walls and roofs, 30% on final fitting and decoration, leaving us 20% retained until final inspection. Incentive payments are bonus payments made to suppliers, usually a share of the gains made by the buyer for early delivery. But please note, penalty clauses or payments that come due from suppliers or may be withheld from the final amount for late delivery or poor performance are difficult to enforce. It's far better to use what we call liquidated damage clauses. Early payment discounts is cash offered as discount to the supplier to encourage the buyer to pay early. And some suppliers might enforce their right to pay to extra payments for late settlement. And any deviations from planned payments into or out of the organisation need to be tracked, and remedial action may be taken to mitigate disruption or cash flow. So, for example, organisations can reduce the amount of stock they hold or negotiate extended credit terms with their suppliers. Thank you for watching and good luck with your exams.